Yes.
Being 7 o'clock, we will call the October 14th Planning and Development Committee to order. Please call the roll.
St.Charles.
Here.
Folks.
Here.
Bongard.
Here.
Munns. Here. Lencioni.
Here.
Gem.
Here.
Warball.
Here.
Bessner.
Here.
Weber.
Here.
Thank you all. Next to move on to is omnibus vote. We have 4 items on the omnibus. I'm looking for a motion.
Make a
Weber will
motion.
move.
Moved by Weber, second by Munns. Please call the roll.
Warball.
Yes.
Bessner.
Yes.
Weber.
Yes.
St.Charles.
Yes.
Folks.
Yes.
Bongard.
Yes.
Munns. Yes. Gem.
Yes.
Thank you. So, for moving on to community economic development, under A, we have a recommendation to approve amendments to the property maintenance code. Russ, take it away.
Yes, good evening. Over the past year, community development has restaffed our code enforcement program to be more proactive and effective at addressing the community's current needs. And with new staff working with our existing codes over the past few months, we've identified a number of corrections or clarifications to the property maintenance code. The city has adopted the 2021 edition of the property maintenance code with certain local amendments that are in our city code. And tonight we're recommending a number of changes to these local amendments. In most cases, we're not introducing any new regulation. Rather, we're making the current code simpler to follow and administer. These amendments will also help fill some gaps that we run into where we lack a code that directly speaks to an issue. And the goal is not only to clarify the requirements, but also make the city's expectations clearer to property owners who are seeking to correctly follow our codes. So there's a specific list that's been included in the summary. I can answer any questions that you may have on that list.
Back at the committee, are there any questions?
Yeah. So does this apply to rental properties, like single-family homes that are 2 flats and 3 flats?
Correct. So these code requirements would apply to all properties in the community.
Okay. All right. Move for approval.
I have a second. Motion from Warball, second from Gem. Please call the roll.
Warball.
Yes.
Bessner.
Yes.
Weber.
Yes.
St.Charles.
Yes.
Folks.
Yes.
Bongard.
Yes.
Munns. Yes. Gem.
Yes. Thank you. That passes. Moving on to B, discussion regarding construction hours. Ross.
Yes, this is a discussion item regarding the construction hours that are in our noise ordinance. Staff and some elected officials recently had received complaints regarding private construction activity in a residential neighborhood that occurred on a Saturday. That work was related to a building permit for demolition of a house. Under city code, construction hours are regulated under the noise ordinance, which is chapter 9.24 of the city code. The noise ordinance identifies different zones for regulation of noise, the downtown CBD1 district, residential areas, non-residential areas that are within 300 feet of residential areas, and then the remainder being non-residential. And so noise is regulated based on the hours when certain types of noise-generating activities are permitted. For example, there's refuse collection and outdoor maintenance activity also listed in that chapter. Those follow similar hours to construction. So based on these complaints and requests, staff reviewed construction hour requirements for nearby communities and found that some nearby communities have more variation in their construction start hours, particularly on the weekends, where some start as late as 8 a.m. And when we look at construction hours, what we're really trying to do is balance the impact of the noise, which occurs over a short duration of time for a project, versus the practical need to allow for construction to occur in an efficient manner. So we would, staff would support a change to the building permit related construction hours in residential areas on the weekend, since later hours are not uncommon for some of our neighboring communities. We would need to further review how this change would apply to different types of activities. So for example, there's building construction, but we also have site or land development that would fall under this category, and also city construction projects. Currently, governmental entities, including the city, are exempt from our noise ordinance. However, the construction hours are followed for city projects and for contractors who are doing infrastructure projects on behalf of the city. So that's something we would need to review. So we would want to review how those activities would be impacted before we bring back the formal amendment, if directed. Regarding the weekdays, any change to the hours during the week would have a more significant impact, and this would require some additional research and perhaps input from developers and contractors. Currently, we're not aware of any community that restricts weekday construction hours any later than 7 a.m. start time, which is our current time in residential districts. So with that, I can take any questions. This is intended to be an initial conversation to seek direction, and then based on that direction, staff could review this further and bring back a proposal if directed.
The council, Alderman Warbaugh.
So this is something I brought up with staff and initiated the conversation after receiving numerous complaints, not recently and over the years, with tear-downs in the 4th Ward and a lot of heavy equipment starting at 7 a.m., 7:30, primarily on Saturdays and Sundays. So, you know, after talking with a lot of residents, with staff, I agree that it would be, I think, a courtesy and a quality of life improvement for a lot of residents to change Saturday and Sunday from 7 a.m. start to 8 a.m. I'm fine leaving it during the week, and, you know, if it's out of residential, I think it's fine at 7 a.m. So I'm supportive of the change.
Is it possible to get a breakdown of the number of complaints that have been submitted to community development councils? I'm just curious. I want to be careful that we don't go down a path of, we've got a couple of incidences that we're now going to change, you know, code across the city. So I'm looking for, you know, is this problematic across, you know, 4th Ward, 2nd Ward, 1st Ward? When you start moving times, I know seasonality in construction, you know, they try and get out earlier, you know, June, July, August because of the heat, they try and be done. And just having a better understanding, if we're going to go down and start changing this, how many complaints do we get, you know, 2nd Ward, 4th Ward, 1st Ward, you know, with some of this? So that would be really helpful as we start this conversation.
Yeah, and I would say we have records of some of those when they've been reported through our code enforcement system, and we can kind of track, you know, when those occurred and where. But a lot of times the complaints we receive may just be over email or to the elected officials to inquire about, you know, a complaint and ask what the code is, that we don't necessarily record that as a violation, but we can bring back information that we do have, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'd also be curious if there's any correlation with particular construction teams, groups, whenever, you know, that are starting at 7:05 that might be particularly more noisy than, you know, somebody else, but more information that, you know, can help us understand. This is something we have to look at across the city.
Are there any other comments?
Yeah, I mean, I would
Alderman
be curious if these are, you know, related to specific projects that maybe were specifically disruptive or especially disruptive. And, you know, I'm just looking at the times that some of these other municipalities have, and it seems like they're different Saturdays and Sundays. I guess I'm struggling to see how it is that we're going to be able to, for lack of a better word, police that. You know, we have North Aurora that has a 6 a.m. start time on a Saturday, whereas you know, these others seem to have an 7 or 8 a.m. on a Sunday. You know, how are we going to be holding them accountable for this, and how are we going to have residents know that this is the day for that, this is the day for that? I'm just a little concerned that this is a little bit piecemeal, and maybe we are solving something for an entire city that might be for one specific area that could be a good neighbor conversation even.
No, my only question was based on the chart, and thank you for that, Russ. So our 7 to 10 for mixed use is Monday through Sunday, correct? We don't have a distinction for the weekend?
Correct. Right now, there's no distinction for weekend hours for any of the noise regulation.
So all our contractors and obviously the city crews are exempt from that. All contractors know if you work Monday through Sunday, these are your times.
Yeah, so we would have to communicate, you know, when we're issuing permits, what the hours are. We do that now, but this would be a change potentially if something was modified.
Right. So if we change our hours, they're all used to it and they know what.
Yeah, and the enforcement really is on a complaint basis. You know, when we're informed of it, and we would contact the contractor, or they would be approached
Yeah.
if it was occurring at the time someone was available.
Yeah, and much of Alderman Bongard, just an idea on how many we get, and is there a specific contractor that likes to start early and stay too long? If there's any way to get that kind of data, like I said, if it's through email or just a phone call, it might be hard to track, but it would help to be able to figure out what we're trying to solve for. So, thank you, Russ.
Alderman Weber?
Yeah, I mean, I would be in support of the later start on the Saturday and Sunday. Actually, when this was first brought up, I thought that the start time was 8 o'clock in residential areas, so I was surprised to see it at 7, but definitely on the weekends, I would be in support of the 8 a.m. start time.
Yeah, to echo, I feel the same way. I know when they were creating Munhall Glen that first morning when things went off at 7 a.m. and on Saturday at 7 a.m., that was quite a shock to the system. So I know it's just an hour back, but I think that's a nice courtesy for the residents that you have.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's only an hour. I have no problem with it. On a weekend, I have no problem with it at all. So I'll support it.
Yeah, I just want to some of the points that were made, I think it's, when you get a residential complaint and they say, hey, listen, they're starting construction at 7:15 or 7:30, it really isn't a violation. So code's not going to have something that says, hey, they violated because they're actually in compliance. So it's going to be, I get a lot of the complaints. It's not just one specific developer, it's multiple developers. So they're doing tear downs. I mean, that's the thing that they're doing today, and it's just, I'm supportive of it. I think it's a simple change. I think it's a courtesy to the people that live in the neighborhoods.
Any other comments? I'm curious in when this happens, because, I mean, anytime you're doing construction in a residential neighborhood, it's always noisy. I'm curious how many of these things endure when somebody says, hey, this is getting really loud. And I'm curious, how often just having a conversation would alleviate something like that, and also how often, is the fact that we have some of these start times where they're at actually getting a construction project done a little quicker, where I can understand kind of both sides of it. I'm always curious, is a rule really going to alleviate people's concerns? Is it just the start time, or is it the fact that construction in a residential area is always a pain, and you're always going to hear about it? And, if we go to 8, is 9 going to look? I mean, 7 seems, in a residential area, it seems early, but at the other time, it's always going to be a pain. Are we going to get pressure to move it back, and what's the downside of moving it? And are there times when there's a complaint that's being issued, that nobody cares because this is what we're allowed to do? I would think that the good neighbor kind of convention works pretty often. Alderman Munson.
I also would want to ask, does that mean that we would also revisit our policies about things like lawn care on the weekends? Would we change our hours for that? I got neighbors that mow their lawn at 7 a.m. on a Saturday. That's within our noise ordinance. Would we want to change that?
But that's not construction. So this is more when you have a bulldozer or a 50,000-pound excavator pounding down a foundation at 7 a.m. in a residential neighborhood. That's not good.
No, I recognize.
So lawnmowers, weed whack, that's a separate ordinance under a different code. So this is strictly for residential. It's not for mixed use. It's not for non-residential. It's only for residential from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. That's all. We're not changing anything else. I mean, we could, if you wanted to look at the other things, we could, but for me, that's the only focus.
I recognize it. That's not quite done. I recognize that, but my point is that it's all noise. It all wakes people up. The whole intent is that this is disruptive to people's weekend mornings and upsetting to them in the morning. So I guess if we're going to look at one thing, are we saying that one thing is more or less important to them? And if you're getting woken up because your neighbor is using their very loud lawnmower every Saturday morning at 7 a.m.,
I think that's where Paul's point comes in, because that's where you can have the conversation with the neighbor for courtesy. When it's a construction company, it's for profit, right? They're there to make money. They're there to get started at 7 a.m. And I don't blame them. That's why but if it's a lawnmower, to me, it's kind of like if your kids are outside screaming on the top of their lungs at 6:30, you say, hey, let's hang on, it's Saturday morning. You know what I'm saying? So I think to Paul's point, I think that's more courtesy versus construction is more of a business type of activity. I think that's the difference between.
Well, I do have a question. A lot of this kind of was brought forward. I mean, I'm sure that there were other times, but there was a pretty atypical situation where there was a bomb shelter that had to be removed that was completely made of concrete.
Yes, I think the demolition of the house in question was unusually complicated because of how it was constructed.
Yeah, like an underground bomb shelter that was like just solid concrete.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm going to go back because I want to make sure that we're changing policy because we have a overwhelming response or track record or documentation that we've got 215 complaints or like that. The nuance of, well, we should change this because we're hearing, act like quantifiable, being able to say, if most of us didn't realize that the construction hours were 7 a.m., we thought they were 8 a.m., but I don't get, a ton of complaints about construction. Granted, in the second ward, where I'm at, there's not a lot of new development. But I am curious if you've got, 25 complaints that happened from, construction season in March through October, like that would be really helpful to know. So I don't want to be dismissive of residents who are like, yeah, every time that the weather warms up and here come the crews, like, but if we don't have that, if we're not getting those, I want to be careful that we're not changing policy because of one particular example of something that was inconvenient, and I feel bad that happened, but now we're going down this, well, yeah, it makes sense, let's change it because of one particular case. So it would just be really helpful to know, like, community development receives X amount of complaints that are tied to this specific thing, and we definitely need to look at it.
Well, I think it'd be fair, and then we'll go here. Keep it on our radar. I think it's important to pay attention to, but being the first time that it came up, we can always, it's on our radar now, and if it persists now that we're aware of it, I don't think we have to take action the very first time that we talk about it, but it is important to know.
My thought was that being connected strictly to things that require permits, like construction permits. I picture, the demo of a house or the building of a deck or a roof job that's going on. Just if it's connected to a permit, then you start at 8 o'clock so people aren't hearing a circular saw next to the house at 7 in the morning on Saturday. That was my mindset, not for normal uses like lawn mowing and things like that. That's where my head was at with it.
Yeah, I think this isn't like a one incident thing, and again, I think it's difficult for staff to document things that are not a violation. If somebody's starting at 7 a.m., it's not a violation. So they're not going to have the records you're looking for. If they're starting at 6:30 in the morning, they may get a complaint and they'll say, listen, they're compliant, so you're not going to have the documentation. I get the phone calls, I get the text messages, the emails. I say they're compliant. And they're saying, well, why don't they start a little later on the weekends? I said, that's a great point. During the week, I get it. But, in a residential area, I think it's just a quality of life thing. So for me, I don't think it's a big deal. I think this conversation's really, getting more complicated than it needs to be. I think it's a simple change. So that's...
Good. Well, I have it down as a discussion item for now.
Yeah, so based on the discussion, we'll bring back some additional information and a concept for an amendment for the committee to consider.
Okay. Thank you very much. So that moves us on to 4C, recommendation to enter a memorandum of agreement with Kane DuPage Soil and Water Conservation District regarding erosion control services.
Yes, back in June, we had presented a concept to have the Kane DuPage Soil and Water Conservation District assist the city with erosion control inspections, and we discussed the concept of having the cost covered through site development application fees that we're already collecting for large projects. The Kane DuPage District worked with us to revise their standard form of memorandum of agreement to enable us to utilize their services on our behalf. The city would retain enforcement jurisdiction for erosion control issues, and we could terminate the agreement with 30-day notice if needed. So staff is recommending approval of this memorandum of understanding.
Committee. Questions, comments? I'm looking for a motion.
Move for approval.
Moved by Wirball, second by Gamble. Please call the roll.
Wirball,
Yes.
Messner,
Yes.
Weber,
Yes.
Kulturitis,
Yes.
Folks,
Yes.
Bongar,
Yes.
Munn,
Yes.
Gem.
Yes.
Thank you, that passes. That's everything for 4, so we have public comment. Seeing none, back up additional items from staff. Council? Nothing here? Okay, no additional items, so, we'll just executive session. I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved by Bongar, second by Wirball. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned.